We build our fence or railing for the outside of the project much like we did the railing that went around the light. I have a 1/4 inch wide strips and I have cut 7 that are 4 3/8, and I've cut 2 that are 1 inch and 1/8. And then I just have white cardstock because my fence is white, and it is 1/2 inch wide, and I've lined it up flush with the bottom of my strips, and I'm just joining them all in a row. And when I start, I'm leaving at least 1 inch on the end, and I start with one of the little short ones, and then I'll put all 7 in a row here, and then I'll end with the last little one, and again leave at least 1 inch on the end. So I'll be back when I have those all put together. So now that I have all of my little strips joined, I just want to take my scissors and make a little snip right at each intersection and just down to the chipboard. And then we can wrap each one of these sections, with the exception of the little short ones. Just leave that paper alone for now, but then wrap these to the outside on all of the other sections. So I'll do that and then I'll be back. So now to prep for putting the fence works on, we want to treat our ends, and we actually do want to wrap the little short ends, but I think you can see I've made a cut there. And then what we need is about 1 inch overhang here. So I'm going to cut that back, and then we only need we need a 1/4 inch wide thing to wrap. We're going to wrap back around here eventually. So I'm just trimming off the top part here. I'll do that again down at this end. Leave about 1 inch, and then this thing is kind of unwieldy. And then what we want to do is put on, and this is the outside, the side that we see a little bit of chipboard on. We want to put some score tape on there, but you need to put it into individual sections for the length of each one of your sides, otherwise it won't be able to bend. So I'll go ahead and get that prepped. Now it's time to fit the railing to the lid, and as you may be able to see, I have mine up on my foundation, and I did that for 2 reasons. First, it's just easier to work on if this is up a little bit, at least it is for me. And then the second thing is, by doing that, if you're having the little ladder, you'll make sure that you put the brake in your lid in the right place where that magnet is. So you can probably see I've got a couple of pieces of low tack tape on here, and what I've done is just temporarily fastened it in 2 places, because then we can do our glue up in a couple of stages and nothing should shift around. Now it's sized to fit somewhere between 1/16 and 1/8 or so away from the edge. You, of course, when you do your dry fit, you'll want to make sure that nothing is going over the edge. And then down here in the front, where the brake is for the ladder, we should have about 1/8 of an inch on each side between where the railing ends and where this top step of the ladder is. So that's what I'm aiming for here. And like I said, I'm going to do my glue up in 2 stages. I'm going to see where this is going to go and just put a bead of glue underneath it and then put it down, and then work on my sections going around. So, and then we'll let that dry till it's absolutely bone dry before we continue. Just a tip on gluing. I glued these 3 sections in the back here on, and I allowed them to set up, and then I know where I want to put my glue line here because I've kind of made a picture in my mind of where it's going. So now I can just kind of swing it out of the way, put in my glue for these sides, and just lightly pick this up and set it back down. And that way it makes it easy to glue this up. And while the glue is setting up on the railing, I've painted my 2 toothpicks to match the color of my fence, which in my case is white. And I just have them here with some clothespins to hold on to, and also this is a good way to just set them up and let them dry. So my little chipboard railing here is glued up solidly dry, and now we're ready to put in our toothpicks, and they are acting like fence posts at the end here. They're going to go in right next to that piece of chipboard. But if you're like me, depending on what you're using for a fence, the toothpick may be too long. You can see here that this will be too long once I get my fingers out of the way. So you need to see where you're attaching your fence and trim off your toothpick. Remember, there's chipboard on the bottom here, so it needs to be at least a 1/16 inch shorter than the bottom, not too much shorter than that. And then once you've cut it to length, I'll just get this one cut. So once you've cut it to length, go ahead and just use your craft knife to kind of whittle that cut end to a point, and that'll make it easier to put in the hole when we poke it with our awl. So there, I've got it whittled to a point. And then we want to put it so that it comes flush right up against the end of the, end. So when you poke your hole, you'll do that, and you should be at least a 1/16 of an inch back from the edge, otherwise you'll run into the chipboard that's in the edge of the project, of course. Don't make your hole too big. And then you can run a little glue on this edge here, and then we'll also be wrapping this little flap around it. So I'm just putting some glue on the edge and then poking a bunch down in that hole. So once you have the posts in, remove the score tape backing and go ahead and wrap these little flaps around, and then make sure that your posts are plumb and square, etc., and let them dry thoroughly. Once your fence posts are dry, go ahead and put some score tape on these 2 sections where it needs it. And then let's talk about our fence. So I've made enough fence. I've got it in 2 pieces, and I've got enough to go halfway around each side. Now it's probably a little bit much, but this gives me options. So, and also I did my fence using that same Spellbinders die as I did for the light railing around the deck up there. And so, as you recall, I used 2 layers. And what I've done the same thing here too, but on the ends, on both ends, where I'm going to come into my posts. I haven't glued it together. I think you can see there that it's separate. And what I'm going to do is just kind of notch the back side. All right, I think you can see there how I've notched the back side. I've just cut off this the little leg down here and come across there. And what that's going to allow me to do when I install the fence down here is that I can put 1/2 of that last fence on the inside and 1/2 on the outside of my post. Now, you could just, if you just have a single layer, you'll just glue it right to the front of this post. That toothpick, if it's the same color as your fence, it will be very unnoticeable. So now I'm going to use glue to do the fence part, and then we can start working our way around, removing the score tape here. And I'm going to attach 2 sides on one side and 3 sides on the other, and then see where I am and look at options. So I'm going to do that, and then one thing as you do it, make sure that you're keeping track of that the fence is not getting bent over, that you make a little crease when you get to the corners here so that your fence stays nice and upright. So I'll get that much installed and then I'll be back. So I've just put a clothespin here to hold this one side up, and this side is glued to here. And I just want to see what's going on in the middle here. And on mine, I'm really close to being right on. In fact, I think I can probably, if I don't stretch this side too tight, I'll be fine. Now, if that isn't the case for yours, you can either live with it, or you could cut a new section of fence and just allow some extra spacing on the 2 sides here, and then I don't think it would be very noticeable. So I'm going to go ahead and complete my fence installation. And then our last step for the fence is to finish off the outside, and I've just cut some 1/4-inch strips just like we did on the light deck, and I'll just wrap them around here at the bottom, going all the way around. So that will complete the railing. And then carefully burnish along the edge there, making sure to support it, and be careful of your fence because it's probably a little fragile. Now to finish off the 2 ridge lines here, I cut a piece of pattern paper that is 3/4 of an inch wide, and scored it down the center at 3/8, and I've inked the edges and applied some score tape to it. And then for the main roof ridge line, I just cut a piece that's going to fit exactly in between here. You can always cut it just a little bit long to begin with and then snip it off to fit. And when you put it on, make sure it's coming up to a nice crease and following the edge of the ridge line. And then with the leftover piece, we want to complete the entrance roof ridge line. Now a couple things we'll want to do, and number 1 is to cut an angle in the back here to match the angle of where this ridge meets the roof. And then once we have this angle made, we can cut it to length on this end. But before we install this piece, I want to just dry fit it up here. And I want to make a little piece that's going to cover up this point underneath here. This little hole here I think is kind of unsightly. So I'm just marking with a pencil where the bottom edges of that piece are coming. So just the edge, where the edge of the ridge strip is on both sides. And then I've just cut a little piece of 3/8 inch wide pattern paper that I backed with some score tape. And this is, right now it looks like it's, an inch and 3/8 or so long. It's not going to need to be very long. And what I'm going to do is hold it up against where I made those marks, kind of center it there, and then figure out where I need to make a crease in it so that I can bring a little piece to a point right there. And I'll take that off and reinforce those creases. So I've zoomed in and put this little piece of white cardstock behind here so you can see what our goal is. And that is to cover up this little hole here that's at the top of this peak. And when we made our two little marks here, that's going to give us something to line up a little piece of pattern paper with that can wrap across there. Now I've cut this piece, it's a I would say 5/16. It's a little bit wider than quarter, a little bit less than 3/8. And this one is a good 1.5 inches long, but we won't need something that's that long. That's just something to hold on to. So what we're going to do is line it up on the bottom edge line the bottom edge up with the little tick marks that we made there and crease it into a triangle. So I'll do that. So now I've got a little triangle that can go up there. And the last thing we need to do before we attach it is, if you look here on the sides, you can see that it's hanging down. And we need to trim that off so that it won't hang lower than our piece of ridge trim. And I don't remember if I said this before I started. I backed that piece with some score tape. So now I have a little piece that looks like this. You can see the folds in the middle. And before I remove the score tape backing and put it down permanently, I'll hold it on there and test it out with my ridge piece. So here's my test fit. I haven't attached that piece down. I'm looking at it from the sides and I can see I trimmed them off sufficiently. And so now I can go ahead and install that little triangle piece on the front and then put the ridge cap down. And now I think you can see how nicely that finishes off the entrance roof. So in order to make the steps, the pieces are very small. So in the cutting guide I just said scraps. And the scraps that we'll need are 3/8 inch wide. We need 2 at 1 1/2 inches. And then at 1/4 inch wide, we need one that's at 1 1/4 inches and one that's at 1 3/8 inches. And then out of 1/2 inch wide, we need two pieces that are 1 1/4 inches long. And then here I just have a scrap that's approximately 1 inch by 3. And that's just to give us, the length is just to give us something to hold on to while we cut the small sides of the steps. So, to make the step sides, we'll take our little piece here, and the step sides are going to be 1/2 inch tall. So first I'm just going to draw a line 1/2 inch down, and then the top step comes in 1/4 inch. And the bottom step is at 5/8, and then in between them it's 1/4 inch down. So let's see if I've got this little piece here. So it's 1/2 inch tall, it's 1/4 inch down to the first step, and then 1/4 inch down to the ground. This is 1/4 inch wide here. This would be 3/8 inch wide here because the whole unit is 5/8 inch wide. So I'm going to cut 2 of those little pieces. So to put our little stairs together, I have them oriented so the 1/2 inch is the vertical height and the 5/8 is the horizontal distance. And I'm going to start by putting a bead of glue on one piece and then taking one of the 1/2 inch pieces and attaching it to the back, and then attaching the other little piece. So we have something that looks like that. And then we can inset our other little 1/2 inch piece. So I'll just run a bead of glue along the bottom on the inside. And slip that in. And it should be staying back about 1/16 of an inch from the front end. And then our piece of 1/4 inch that is also 1.25 inches long, we'll put that in. Pieces are a little fiddly. And then the longer piece of 1/4 inch is that 1/8 inch longer, so that we'd be able to put glue on these 2 little tabs and put it in right there, and it should fit edge to edge. So that's the base of our steps. I'll just let that dry for a moment, and while it's drying, I'll cut out some pattern paper. I've got, for the front of the 2 risers, a strip that's 1/4 inch long, and I've just cut it, about 5 inches to start with, and I've got it backed with some 1/4 inch score tape. And then we'll want to cut out 2 sides for our steps using the same dimensions that we did when we had the chipboard. Make sure you make 2 mirror images. And then lastly, for our treads, we'll just take a strip of 3/8 inch score tape, attach that on there, and then just cover the top edges of the treads with pattern paper. So I'll do that, wait for my stair base to dry, and then I'll be back. So to finish off our steps with pattern paper, we're going to take our 2 little 1/4 inch strips, and I've cut them a little bit longer so that they can wrap around the front of our risers. Now, one thing you want to check before you go to put them on is to make sure that you don't have any overhang of the pattern paper there. It's really hard to cut these tiny little pieces exactly accurate. So if you need to cut this back, and I had to cut mine down, just a smidge, so it's a little bit less than 1/4 inch wide to fit on that top riser. So then I removed the score tape backing, and I'll just center that on my riser and wrap it around to the 2 sides. and I'll repeat that for my bottom piece. And then I can take my little side pieces that I cut and put them on. And I'll give them a good burnish. Now the treads will overhang a little bit, so now's the time to look to see if there's anything you want to ink or if everything looks good on the sides. And then for our treads, we'll just center them and use some white glue to put them on. And make sure that when you put the top one on, that it lines up with the back edges of the steps. And then of course you'll do this when the project is standing upright, but just to show you where this goes, the little steps just get centered underneath the front door, and just use some white glue to glue them in and hold it there with a little pressure until it sets up. And there we have our front steps installed. Now we're ready to attach our lighthouse to either the foundation, or if you're didn't make the foundation, to the base. And I've removed, as you can see, the lighthouse, the light roof up here, just because I'm going to have to tip it over to add my glue, etc., and I don't want that to be falling off. So when I put this on, I'm just going to use wet glue, and I'll put it around various places, the perimeter, get a little bit under the steps here, and put some in the middle. So that's where the glue is going to go. Now if you've just built the base, it of course has supports in the middle, so it's all ready to go. You can just put it down and then add the building on top. But if you built the foundation base, it has support on these sides, but I think it would be better to have some temporary support here in the center while you're doing this glue up, so you'll be able to put a little pressure on the building. So you could use cans, or I'm just using a combination of different rolls of score tape to get up to this level here, so that I'll have something that's at that surface, so that when I bring in my lid and fit it down on top of here, it has good support everywhere. So I can feel safe about putting some pressure on it. Now I'd suggest you do a dry fit. Just lower the house carefully into there so that you don't hit any of the fence works. And now I'm going to try to put mine on a little bit of an angle here to show you where I'm going to have mine. I'll of course have it centered side to side, but in the back corners where the building is here, where I'm putting my thumb, I only have about 1/8 of an inch between the corner of the building and the fence line. That's to allow, it's a little tricky, that's to allow some good space in the front by the steps, between the steps and the edge. Now you can cheat that back a little. You could put it right up against the fence. That's why you're doing a dry fit, just to see exactly where you want to put it. And then once you decide where it's going, either take a mental picture or put a couple. I feel better with having some tick marks, or if you don't like to make tick marks, you could take some little pieces of Post-its to help mark those corners, like that. Just whatever works, so that you'll have a place to aim for, so that when you're coming down with your building, you know where you're going and you feel confident. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I've got everything spaced out right, and then go ahead and glue it on.